the panic mongering that these people went in for, not only when America dropped bombs on Iran, but when Israel surgically struck the leadership targets in Iran. Even then, they were going crazy and saying this was an unprovoked unilateral attack, when of course it wasn't. Iran has been attacking Israel very often over the past few years.
I can't wait for this next guy because everything he has said since the beginning of the war has just been perfect. It's like one of the last people who have actually got any common sense left. So let's dive right in.
I want to come back to Britain in a moment, but I want to tease out some points you've made there and elsewhere about the MAGA movement, and especially that divide that exists between the MAGA movement and the Trump presidency on certain issues. And you mentioned the one of Iran. I thought sections of the America First, so-called America First MAGA movement made complete fools of themselves on that question. You know, Tucker Carlson infamously said that if America bombs Iran, millions will die. The only thing that died was Tucker Carlson's reputation, you know.
Oh, I love this point because look how quickly everyone's forgotten. Everyone's still making Tucker Carlson out to be the god of the world, fighting back, the man who really stands for America first, and yet he lied and caused panic to millions and millions and millions of people, and he's been forgiven just like this because his rhetoric is so wrong, but no one will see it even if the evidence is right up against their face.
The panic mongering that these people went in for, not only when America dropped bombs on Iran, but when Israel surgically struck the leadership targets in Iran. Even then, they were going crazy and saying this was an unprovoked unilateral attack, when of course it wasn't. Iran has been attacking Israel very often over the past few years. What do you think that particular moment, the Iran question, and I guess the Israel question more broadly, which is a huge one for the MAGA movement, what do you think that tells us about where the MAGA movement is going and whether Trump should just cut it loose on these questions?
Well, Trump's certainly not going to cut it loose. And one of the great benefits of the Trump, and I don't think it's unfair to call it a personality cult. There are many people in America who are so loyal to him, they will effectively, if he says the sky is blue today and tomorrow says it's green, they will go along with both on each subsequent day. And the benefit of that is he can take that movement pretty much wherever he wants. I think that's certainly true. I wish I were as optimistic as you about the career and reputation of people like Tucker Carlson. I think they get to spew this nonsense over and over and over and never actually be held to account because
unlike Israelis, though, right? We have to be held to account for absolutely everything that goes on, but people can go on and lie and lie and lie. Unfortunately, you know, I actually liked Tucker Carlson before. I liked him before, and I love that this is being called out, as it should be. It should be called out that people are just willing to forgive him, and not hold him accountable or not use their brains to realize, look, if this guy was so majorly and catastrophically wrong, maybe he's wrong about some other stuff.
Many of the people who listen to them don't really consider their statements to be something that should be held against them in the future. So Tucker Carlson can spew all this nonsense today and then still be considered an authority within the MAGA movement tomorrow.
By the way, do you know this is one of Hamas tactics? It's called post and then apologize, but no one reads the retracting. No, it's called posting and retracting, right? You write some crazy, horrible lie about the Jewish people or about Israel. It spreads like wildfire. Everybody believes it. And then you write, oh, sorry, this was actually factually incorrect. And you can get away with it because it's a time of war and lies come out and things are not always exactly accurate and we're just reporting from second to second. But who reads the retraction? No one ever does. So you can just keep on going and say, oh, yeah, I apologize. I retracted, which Tucker Carlson hasn't actually even really done. Till this point, he's kind of done it, but not really, and no one will see it. It's like one of the #1 strategies of propaganda that Hamas use. Let's make a crazy lie about a hospital being bombed and thousands of people being killed, and then like 6 months later be like, oh, we're so sorry, it was actually no one.
The fact that he was proven completely wrong, the fact that people like Marjorie Taylor Greene were proven completely wrong, the fact that comic Dave Smith, who called President Trump to be impeached, was proven to be completely
Dave Smith. Oh, Dave, do I have a bone to pick with you?
All of these people are going to continue to have a major voice on the right in America. I don't know why exactly. I don't want to be insulting or demeaning to the people who listen to them, but it is hard to understand how you could listen to somebody and take their opinion seriously when they said with such confidence and such vehemence that A, B, C, D, and E will happen. And in fact, quite the opposite will happen. And President Trump, of course, proved himself to be entirely correct on all these issues. And he proved that peace through strength means that you actually have to use that strength every now and again to deal with and intimidate people who want to threaten peace. That is what I think he did in Iran. And that, of course, is what Israel, as you rightly say, is doing. It is dealing with its enemies who've been attacking it for a very long time. So what happens with the MAGA movement over time is a difficult one. I think it's partly a generational thing.
This is so interesting that he brings up, because I just had somebody else talk about this. It is a generational thing. There is something in the way that Christianity used to be taught, in which the connection to Israel, evangelicalism, all of that is so strong. And the younger generation seems to have just not really received that kind of Christian ideology of the fact that Israel is actually really important and integral to the future of the world.
Americans who are sort of 35, 40 and older are instinctively very pro-Israel. I think there is a section of the American youth on the left and right who is instinctively very anti-Israel for very different reasons. Of course, as I don't need to tell you, the woke left is very anti-Israel on the basis that strength is bad.
Right, strength is bad. And again, like, why we love the underdog, right? But we love the underdog when it actually succeeds. No one likes an underdog that just keeps on failing. But the woke left has created this mentality of just like eternal victimhood. Eternal victimhood is so much more worthy than somebody who actually has strength. And that's exactly what Israel has proven since the beginning of this war. Unbelievable amounts of resilience and strength. Something that most people should be like, wow, how do they do this? How do we learn from them? But instead, they're like, no, free Palestine. Again, the slogan for idiocy nowadays.
Therefore, Israel defending itself robustly is bad. And of course, we shouldn't generalize. There are also a lot of people who just are confronted for the first time by the reality of war.
Right. This is a massively important point. No one likes war. War isn't a good thing. I can tell you this as somebody who's living through a war. It is not a positive thing. But sometimes it's an important thing. Sometimes it's something that needs to happen for certain reasons. And again, if everyone actually wanted to be peaceful, if everybody actually believed that idea, then we would never have to have war. And I think that's something that the Western atheist mentality has created, this kind of pretense, because the World War II was so far back, we can't actually even remember it in our own selves. Even though there are still people who survived it living around us, we don't really live with the reality of what it means to fight existentially for our existence. It's something that the Jewish people understand more than others, and specifically Israel does, because we've been up against war after war after war, none of which we have started. Not one of them have we have started. And this is what's interesting, because if you believe the Western society ideal of freedom and peace, then of course you're going to think war is a terrible thing. But if you're talking in the world of religion and in the world of radical Islam and jihadists, to them war is actually a really positive thing, because killing people is a way to get what you want. Right? Murder them and get them into submission if they don't want to die. And so what people forget and don't realize is that, yes, war is always terrible, but sometimes it is necessary. And if you haven't grown accustomed to that idea, it can seem to you as something that should just never happen. That's utopian and not true, because there are people out there, millions, if not billions of people, who believe that war is actually the ideal way of living, which is why there's so much conflict within the Middle East. No, it's not because of Israel. It's because of these other countries, these Arab countries that still have that mentality.
In high definition on their smartphones that is being fed to them 24/7. And they perhaps lack the historical context and all sorts of other context to be able to contextualize it and to understand that, yes, war is bad, but then the question you have to ask is who is responsible for the fact that this is happening, which is, of course, Hamas. On the right, there is this conspiratorial fringe that has been looking for somebody to blame for all the ills of America for a very long time. And they've been dancing around. I wrote an article a long time ago called Tucker Carlson and the Woke Right, in which I talked about the fact that the woke right at that point hadn't quite understood or coalesced around a single point of blame. They kept talking about globalists and all of these other things, but they couldn't quite pin it down. What happened with the war in Israel is it gave a lot of the latent anti-Semitism that was already rife within that movement a focal point. And now, of course, everything is the Jews' fault, which is where it's ended up. So there is this, and for now, they're still using Israel. Eventually, I suspect they will simply convert that into just Jews, which a lot of them are already doing.
Right.
Which is to say that, the reason that we have mass illegal immigration, the reason that the economy has been not as successful as we want it to be, the reason that this, the reason that that, the reason all of these things are happening are because of Israel, i.e. because of the Jews. And it gives a very stupid people a very easy way of understanding, as they think, very complicated geopolitical issues.
Right, this is so important. Stupid people don't like to understand complex ideas. They would like it to be really stupefied for them, made really, really, really simple. Now, we tend to look at the right as this kind of more intellectual elite because they've been using intellectual arguments against a very emotive and angry woke left. But we've forgotten that there's actually a huge amount of people on the right who are not sophisticated and intelligent. They're just much more conspiracy theory type people, and they go very, very, very far in their lengths. If you go back a few years ago, remember, who were the real anti-Semites? They were the extreme right. And that never really died out. It's just that the center kind of went more and more extreme. So the most of central people weren't really anti-Semitic. But the more you push them into these extremities, into these sides, what's ending up happening is we're seeing on the right this extreme anti-Semitism. And it's amazing. It's amazing how you can blame the Jews for everything instead of giving them credit and trying to learn from them and be like, wow, who are these people and how are they massively succeeding in such a way? It's like, oh, they must have a plan to come get us. They give us so much credit. It's kind of cool, honestly.
Complicated domestic issues, very complicated issues of every kind. And it's interesting, of course, that they will focus on Israel while observing their biggest and most important city being taken over by a radical left-wing, insane socialist like Mamdani.
Well, I think, again, this is important. This is the thing that we keep saying. We are so watching people be afraid of having to deal with reality, that they'd rather say, oh, this is the Jews, this is Israel, they're the ones who are destroying New York City, instead of, let's focus on Israel and Gaza and humanitarian issues, instead of actually dealing with the things in front of them, which is the fact that this insane Palestinian movement, this insane woke movement has managed to bring in to their city new leadership, which would be so, so, so damaging. But that's just it. That's cognitive dissonance. You're afraid to deal with reality. Israelis have been forced to deal with it. By the way, many Europeans are starting to become more and more aware of the reality that they're up against as these crazy amounts of immigrants come in and are destroying their city. 10% of France is now Muslim. 10% of France. It's nuts. They're coming in and destroying their cities, and so they're starting to realize. The politicians, of course, are trying to kind of suck up to these people because they need them for their voting numbers. But in the United States, you literally have somebody like Mamdani, a crazy, raving socialist who talks in TikTok points and has no actual legitimacy to his ideals except outside of, like, defund the police and let's make it more like San Francisco, a crazy place where, all the crazies roam the street and everyone has no money. He has these crazy, crazy ideals, destroying really the epicenter of the freedom of America, New York City. And yet they still want to focus on Israel because they realize that Israel is such an easier scapegoat than dealing with the fact that radical Islam's coming for them as well.
Which is fascinating to me, that while that is happening in the most Jewish city in America, they're still obsessed about the Jews. It just tells you about the sort of prevalence and the strength of this ridiculous sentiment.
That's a very good description, I think, of the scapegoating of Israel, which, as you say, we see on both the left and increasingly on the right, and what you have referred to as the woke right in particular. How bad do you think that could get? I mean, we've seen the comedian Dave Smith, who you mentioned, who is,
the worst.
Rapidly anti-Israel in a way.
So anti-Israel. Oh, self-hating Jews.
Which just doesn't often stack up factually, never mind, morally.
He's just such a good debater. He gets people into this kind of corner instead of actually talking about the facts.
Or politically. And he has a large platform now, largely on the basis of his Israelophobia. There are many other people like that. But there are others who have started openly saying Jews, as you say. And some of those people get a platform some of them have even been offered a platform on Joe Rogan's podcast. Some of them have appeared on Piers Morgan's show, and I think it's absolutely within the rights of all presenters to have on their shows whoever the hell they want to have on their shows. So I have no...
I think this is a really important point. You have to allow people to speak. Look, there's a big argument for, trying to censor people who are anti-Semitic because it really normalizes it. And I agree with that. It does normalize it, but we also have to see it. We also have to know that it exists, and we have to be able to fight back. We just have to get better at fighting back. I'm so against the argument of just trying to kind of shut these people down. What needs to happen is the people who are interviewing them have to have the integrity to call it out for its insanity, and that's where we're lacking. We're lacking people like Piers and like Joe Rogan who own these big platforms who can actually call out the insanity. One of the only ones that we have is like Ben Shapiro, and it's not okay that we don't have more of them and that the main leadership has lost their moral clarity. That's really where the problem lies.
Issue with that at all. But how much worse do you think this kind of creeping anti-Semitism could get? How much more explicit could it get? Could it become the defining ideology of some sections of the right?
I think it already is the defining ideology of some sections of the right. The question is how big and important and valuable those sections are. I think, I know for a fact that those sections don't really have any purchase with the current administration. But as I say, it's also a generational thing. I certainly think that once President Trump leaves office, there is a very real possibility that those voices become far more prominent. Or not. It really fundamentally depends. So far,
I think this is something that Israel really has to gear up for, because one thing that is correct, a lot of people have called out that Israel is very dependent on the United States, and now the United States gets a lot in return for the relationship, unlike those people will claim, right? It's not exactly like they're just giving us money. There's a whole complicated situation going on there, which involves agreements that we can't really get out of. But Israel really needs to prepare for the fact that right now, even though Trump is such a good friend to us, the next administration is probably not going to be anywhere near. And we have to take the steps, even if that means towards the end of the Trump relationship, kind of ending things on not a good terms. We have to take the steps now to ensure that come the next administration, we're just not nearly as dependent on them for military things.
I think ultimately they have to. They will inevitably end up discrediting themselves with their hysteria and all of this other nonsense. And by the way, I certainly wouldn't group Dave Smith into that. I think he's very ill-informed, but he represents a somewhat different movement in America, which is there is a very strong anti-war worldview, and it's been ongoing for decades now. And look, I think these people are fundamentally mistaken and ignorant, and they don't really understand how the world works, and they don't understand how important it is for the prosperity and safety and security of Americans that America maintains its empire around the world. They don't make the connection between their incredible living standards and the fact that America controls global resources, global trade. It has incredible global influence by using its power abroad, which of course it has to do to maintain those things. But nonetheless, I have said this before. I was on tour with Jordan Peterson last year for some of the medium-sized towns in America. And it does get a lot harder to argue for, supporting Ukraine when you're in Oklahoma. It's hard to explain to somebody on the ground in the middle of America why their tax dollars, and increasingly the fear is, I think because of Vietnam, that their sons and husbands will be sent to fight elsewhere. That's a big concern, which is not very logical given what's going on, but that is the fear that actually drives a lot of people.
And I understand that. I really hear that fear because as somebody who knows too many people in the army, that's a big deal. But again, here's the important thing to notice. America isn't fighting for us. That's just a lie propagated. They're not. Israel is doing all of the heavy lifting. All that's happening is America's come in here and there to help and support in different ways. When it comes to taxpayers' money, at the end of the day, yes, there's a reality to the fact that they are giving us some stuff, but so much of that is returned to them. Instead of America needing to hold military situations here in the way that it has the Israeli resources to do that. It's unbelievable the kind of lack of information and the way that it's just made out to be that they're handing over all their money to us. It is so far removed from reality.
It is hard to explain to people in that situation why it is that they should really care about a country on the other side of the world, which they've never been to. Many of them couldn't even find it on the map. And I don't mean that in a disparaging way. There's countries I couldn't find on the map. And I don't particularly concern myself with what's happening in Peru right now. Do you know what I mean? So from an American's perspective, that anti-war grouping will always be there. I think the anti-Semitic fringe is a somewhat different, although correlated group of people, and how important they are. I think they're massively over-indexed in our debates, partly because people like Piers and others, they get their guests a lot from the online discourse that they see, which is not, in my experience, remotely reflective of what's happening on the ground in America. When I go there,
Right. And this is so important once again. Like, the media is not the reality. Media is never the reality. I don't know if you've ever been to a country after you've read it on the news, you'll see so many things and you're going to struggle to come by. Like, I often use the example of Boston, right? I know Boston from the Boston Marathon, but if I was to go there, my experience would not be a terrorist attack during a marathon. That's not the reality of Boston. There's so much more going on. And so these places, these people online who are looking for nothing other than clickbait, are focusing so hard on finding the most extreme voices and the ones that make the most noise. And the ones that makes the most noise are the ones who are online saying extreme things, and they are just not the majority. The problem is that the majority is silent, and that's what needs to happen. The center has to fight back against extremism on the right, extremism on the left, and definitely all of us combined fight against extremism like Islam.
I do not meet a lot of these people, even though I meet a lot of people who are on the right. They do exist, but I don't think they represent as many people as you might get the impression that they do from online discourse, particularly because I do think, especially on X, there is a gigantic bot problem that is not being addressed.
Again, and I think, as he's saying, there are so many problems here that are not actually being addressed, and so much of the reality that we see is just not actually reality. Bots and propaganda and extremist voice, and we have to talk about that and realize that actually there is a lot of support for Israel, that actually a lot of people can see the truth, can make sense of it. Obviously, no one really wants children dying, okay? No one wants children dying. A lot of people can understand and demand some sort of intellectual consistency. The problem is when you have these fringe voices creating so much noise, people like Tucker Carlson or Candace Owens coming in with these crazy conspiracy theories and making it sound like they are the norm, they are the majority. It convinces people who are not capable of thinking for themselves, because they watch this stuff and say, oh, if Candace was right on this, or if Tucker was right on this, he's probably right on this, which is actually not true, because there are many things that they're wrong about and many things that they're right about, and you have to kind of use your own intelligence to figure out and dissect which way to go. But this, my friends, is the reality of the internet. It will make you believe stuff that is just not true, and this is why we are seeing increment. I do want to say that I don't exactly agree with him. Whilst, yes, it is not the majority, the problem is more and more prevalent because we are normalizing these kind of conversations, and in addition to that, putting a huge amount of pressure on people, not us, but the propaganda machine, Hamas, are putting so much pressure on people to say things, to support things. I mean, Ariana Grande today tweeted about Gaza, about Israel like crossing a red line. Like, she doesn't know anything about this conflict, not in a real way. In fact, I know for a fact that she's got lots and lots of Jewish friends, but she's being ill-educated. And then when somebody like that posts, a lot of millions of little girls who don't understand things, don't have the ability to really dissect and understand news properly, they're believing it. So it's a bullying thing and not a majority thing, but it does have an impact, and it's negative, and we have to pay attention to that. And that is why voices like this, people like this who come out and say things and stand up against it and call it out for what it is, are so important.